I'll continue to monitor the waiting room as we get started, but I think we can go ahead and begin. Well, welcome to the 2025 South Asia Book Award Meet the Author webinar series featuring this year's award-winning authors and titles. My name is Andrea Fowler. I'm the Assistant Director at the Center for South Asia at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm one of the co-administrators for the Book Award. And tonight I'll be monitoring the chat and the waiting room, so if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat as we go through this evening's event. The South Asia Book Award is supported by the South Asia National Outreach Consortium and given annually for up to 3 outstanding works of children's and young adult literature, which accurately and skillfully portray the experience of individuals living in South Asia or of South Asians living in other parts of the world. Honor books and highly commended books are also recognized by the award committee for their contribution to this body of literature on the region. A complete list of all recognized titles, going back to our first award year, is available on our website, southasiabookaward.wisc.edu. Today's event will include approximately 40 minutes of author presentation followed by Q&A. Please add your questions and comments into the chat box throughout today's event, and after the presentation, we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. Our event today will be facilitated by Dr. Ritu Radhakrishnan, Professor of Curriculum and Instruction at SUNY Oswego. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Radhakrishnan.
Okay, well, thank you, Andrea, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be facilitating this conversation. As Andrea said, please drop questions in. We're excited to hear from you, and I know Saadia is excited to talk about this book. So I will share the screen. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Okay, so just to give you a little overview, because sometimes people drop in and haven't quite read the book. I'll give you a little bit of a historical context and an overview of the book, and then we'll talk a little bit about the bare bones of the book and how it came about, and then talking about the classroom and what that looks like for everyone. So as Dadi mentioned in the book, she grew up in Hindustan or the British India. And so I wanted to give a little context for where that is, and how it came about, how the partition kind of unfolded. So she grew up in Ludhiana, and so I know this is hard to see, so I zoomed in a little bit, and you'll see that over this line, that's sort of the natural barrier where things started happening, and it's this little area right here where she grew up, and Lord Cyril Radcliffe, who was part of the British reign, who was actually a barrister, drew these lines sort of arbitrarily that this part became West Pakistan, and back in the day there was an East Pakistan, that is now Bangladesh, and in the middle was India. So most of the Muslims moved into West Pakistan because they tended to, well, no, I don't even say they tended to be here, but they went that way. And so that was why we had such a large migration of people having to leave their homes in the rest of India, which is much larger. And then you'll see that after World War II, Britain was financially strapped. And so they were having a hard time colonizing, I guess, for lack of a better word, India. And so when they were able to fight for the land. Then and the British left. It was kind of a quick transition, and which led to violence, unrest, and unease, in which we hear from Dadi's story. So just an overview, our heroine is Maha, and she lives in Houston with her dad Abba, her mom Ami, and her brother Talha. She's a seventh grader, and she has a significant interest in journalism, so much she doesn't like YA books and fiction. Abba's mother, Dadi, comes from Pakistan to visit Houston, and he assigns Maha to be the babysitter after school because when someone is coming from another country, sometimes they need a little help. So as she gets to know Dadi, she starts getting Dadi's stories about her life in northern India pre-partition and how she lived in Hindustan. So Maha begins to connect with Dadi and make a deeper connection between the past and the present. And though she's interested in journalism, she starts seeing that there's a reason for stories and a reason for uh, history and connecting those things. So, I'd like to bring it to Sadia, and can you talk a little bit about how the Partition Project originated? Stop right here. Oh, you're on mute.
First of all, thank you so much to the South Asia Book Award and to you, Ritu, for being here and kind of being the expert. I'm no expert in the partition. All I have is stories that I've heard from my family, and literally everybody I knew growing up in Pakistan had a partition story. Even those who had not migrated from India to the newly created Pakistan still had stories of some kind. And so I grew up hearing those from my grandparents, from my parents, from my in-laws, everybody. And it just fascinated me always because you things that you read about in action-packed, kind of scary, realistic movies and TV shows and books, actually happened to people I knew. And growing up, that was always a big fascination. Um, and then I immigrated also to the US and became a mother, and my children did not have the same fascination or affinity to the stories of my grandparents. I think, you're not living in that area, you're not hearing about it every anniversary of the independence. People are not telling you stories at the dining table all the time. And so my kids, first generation American kids, were kind of just, who cares? This happened in, way before our time. Well, we're in the here and now. And that just kind of made me feel sad because I wanted to carry on this legacy. All of us whose more than 1 million people died, were killed in the partition. And so, we are the ones whose grandparents and parents did not die. They survived. We're families of survivors. They lived through a huge trauma. And I didn't want us to forget that. So, and I kept thinking, young people really find it hard often to relate with things that happened a long time ago, and how can we make it more here and now and more interesting? And so that's what Maha does. She's the kid who doesn't care about history, and then there's a living, breathing historical person in her house now, her grandmother, who's lived through something, and she finds it kind of fascinating, like I did when I was a child, to hear those stories and start recording them for other people to hear about. And it just becomes a thing. She's obsessed. She's obsessed with the story, and now she wants to let her classmates and her teachers and her friends all also know about this.
Yeah. So how did Maha come to you? How did she originate? Because she's uh
She's very obsessed, like I
she's
said.
characterized well for someone. I grew up like her. I grew up here. I
Oh,
didn't know
really?
these things.
Yeah.
I mispronounced things all the time. So, Hindi terms. So tell me about how you came up with her character.
So, I've written a lot of books, and most of the characters are kind of like inspired by my own children in some way. Not, I've written a younger series called the Yasmin series. If any of you are familiar with that, Yasmin, the character is literally my daughter. So for my other books, it's not that specific, as in just taking a person and putting them in a book like I did with Yasmin. But most of the time, I look at my own kids and see the thoughts they're having and the emotions they're having and the challenges they're having. As first generation, Muslim American, brown, immigrant, family, kids, just all of that comes with it. And just seeing what their interests are. When you write a lot of books, you have to kind of make sure that you're always your main characters are not the same because they're different. They're different people. Um, My own daughter, who's now in high school, she wants to be a journalist. She's always been interested in the news and reporting on the news. And so, when I thought about something that was like this, I kind of just thought about, I visualized her in my mind and said, if it was her, how would she react? And she gets very, specific about it. No, this is important. You need to know about it. I'm going to tell you why this is important because that's what journalism is, things that other people may not think is important. It becomes their duty to kind of share their passion with others. I think it's
And
a really admirable trait.
it is, and it causes dissension amongst her friends and even within her family. But I think what was so authentic was how she didn't know how to interact with Dadi at first. This person comes and she's moved out of her room and she's she's having to change.
She's making all the sacrifices.
Yeah, her life is so difficult. I mean, all of a sudden she has to babysit this woman who she doesn't know, who is criticizing a lot of things. How just because she's a grandmother, of course they do. And she comes in, that's she's exactly who she's supposed to be. And how did you think about their interactions and how you wanted to illustrate that development of the relationship?
I will tell you, I love the character of the grandmother. I love Dadi. I was very close to my Dadi growing up, to the point that I didn't give up her room. She gave her room to me when my grandfather passed away. I was 13, I think, and she had this now, half empty room, and I had to share with my sisters. And I said, you know what, I'm becoming your roommate. So it was the other way around for us. But I really, so in my adolescent, became very close to my grandmother. And not just the partition stories. You showed the map of how India had been partitioned into East and West Pakistan. My grandparents, from my dad's side, so my Dadi and Dada and my dad when he was a baby, they actually moved to Bengal. So instead of, they were on the other side of India, and so they lived for a good 20 plus years in what was at that time East Pakistan. And then when it became Bangladesh, they moved then to Pakistan. So I just was very close to her, but she could be grumpy, and elders often are, just because of generation gaps, and especially when it's a gap also of cultures. I think that's pretty normal to have that grumpiness, but she's an amazing lady, and Maha realizes that when she gets to know her. I think
Yeah.
it's natural when you're young to kind of get annoyed by people who are way older, just because you're not on the same wavelength. But there's
It,
so much.
it was accurate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but once you get over that, I think that a lot of us miss that, especially in immigrant families. We often don't have our elders with us. And it's sad because we lose that wealth of those relationships.
Yeah. And I think you do such a good job of sort of exploring, that they don't always take their shoes off and like they do in most houses. And Ami, Maha's mother, was actually raised in Dubai. And so just the cultural differences that happen there, even with the food and the way things are engaged, and sort of, I think you characterize all of them so well when they interact. And
Thank
so
you. Thank you.
I,
We a lot of people are like that. I actually got messages from some readers who said, "Oh, why is she so oblivious? She's in seventh grade. She should know all about her culture and her religion." And I don't think that's true. Definitely in my family, yes, my kids grew up like that because I am very cultural and religious, and so I was teaching my kids a lot of things. They still don't speak or do very well, but they will. But everyone's not like that, and we have a vast variety of people from South Asia living in the US and in Europe who really are disconnected with their culture. And I think that that's just because it's not one person's reality. I feel like um that that's what fiction is. I can, as an author, mold some of those things and show the reality of somebody maybe you didn't really know about. So you know that's she learns, her family learns, and that's part of the story.
Well, and I think as the immigrant story, which is very realistic, is that you're trying so hard to assimilate and you're trying so hard to be successful in this area. You don't reject the inherent culture, but it's not dominant all the time. And so you won't know your history. It's not in schools, it's not in the K-12 curriculum. You're just not going to get it unless you spend specific time with it. Um, so partly
I
with
agree.
that, you have Maha very interested in journalism. She's not necessarily connected to storytelling. She doesn't like Percy Jackson, but you don't use a lot of, you tell Dadi's story. You don't use a lot of historical figures or dates or times. What made you make that choice? And how did you decide to really focus on Dadi's story and interweaving it that way?
You know, um, as you are asking me this, probably this is the first time I'm even thinking that, oh, you're right. I did not put any of the big political, I didn't say, oh, Jinnah and the rest of the politicians were saying XYZ. Um, I didn't because that's not how I heard the partition stories. The politics of it, the big picture of it, the national stage of it, I learned in school when we studied history, right? Um, but because I grew up in Pakistan, for those who kind of need that reminder, so this was part of our history curriculum. Always, it still is. But when I heard the stories, it was personal things. This happened to me, my neighbor, my friend. I had to run away in the middle of the night, and my mom dug a hole in the yard and stuffed her jewelry in there because we would come back, and the dinner was still cooking on the stove, and we had to run. We weren't hearing, what's going on politically and what's going on. That's not how stories are told. So to me, it was very organic and how I heard it and how the story was for me. And so that's how I wrote it. And now you're telling me, I'm like, man, did I miss an opportunity? I should have. But then I think, if you're interested as a reader, you can go and search up Google or anything. And that's the part that you is very cut and dried and it's out there in the history books. I don't need to be the one, teaching that. It's not,
Well, I
it's
think
not,
that
it's not a history book.
Yeah, I think that's the strength, though, of using these types of novels in the classroom is that the students aren't engaged all the time with the dates and the people and the time and place. But if you give them a story, it turns it into an inquiry and they can find out more about the story and what the context was. So,
And you relate to people like that. I cannot relate to some, lawyer, some president, some army general. I can relate to an 11-year-old girl if I'm 11, or a 12-year-old girl who suddenly her life has shifted completely because something's going on and nobody wants to answer questions and they just have to escape. Or, her best friend is no longer talking to her because her dad said, we're the enemy now.
yeah,
That's what I'm thinking, right? As a person, as a human being. So, and it happens today too. When you're sure, we're a lot of us are aware because we're, older, but when you're a kid, when you're a teenager, a preteen, things happen even today. You are not thinking what's going on, in politics or in the rest of. You're just thinking very personally, as from a individual level.
yeah.
So I think that's how we are as human beings.
Yeah. And on that vein, you talked about how you learned it in Pakistan, and clearly the textbooks, the few textbooks I've seen between India and Pakistan represent the partition very differently and
Or
represent the violence and the migration and the stories
yeah,
very differently. And Jinnah, Gandhi, Nehru, they're all parts of the story, but they're glorified in their own ways
of
and
course. That's
much
how
like
history is. History is
yeah.
written by, in perspectives. But also, I think that if I had thought about it at that time, I would still have rejected this idea because this book, The Partition Project, is not just for Pakistanis. It's for everybody it's for everybody, period. But it is written, it's not written from the perspective of my country versus for somebody who lives in India. And so if I had brought in some of that more, you know, historical or nonfiction content, how would I have chosen? How would I have chosen? I would not have made everybody happy. I would, if I said so and so did something wrong or so and so, even from the British perspective, there's so much nuance. There's so much. I've gotten to that age in life where I don't believe they're like, nobody's like just doing things because they're horrible people. There's so much going on and there's so much back and forth. And I'm not here to sermonize. I just want to tell a good story that makes you interested and maybe makes you think.
Yeah. And how did as Maha's doing this project, the Partition project, she's also understanding more about her own faith and developing a connection to it that's deeper. Can you talk about how you chose to sort of let that unfold in the book?
Actually don't remember, we were talking about this before we started the webinar, that when we write books and then it takes you a long time to write a book, and then there's an editing process, and then there's a publishing process, and then it's been a while since this book came out last year, and I do not remember why I why I added specifically the fact that it was Ramadan. And I think that while I was writing it, maybe it was Ramadan. I'm guessing that's the reason, because I think that in my first draft, it was not like that. And then I wanted to put in more nuance and more in the revision process. I wanted her to have more of a transformation,
Mhm.
that would kind of make a lot of things clear to her, not just this one thing. And that needed the whole full experience. And so I think I just kind of like added this
Yeah.
the religious, all my most of my books, especially for this age, do have religion and culture in them, but not specifically Ramadan and Eid and all of that. So yeah, I cannot tell you 100% why I did that. Just I
But
thought it would fit.
what you did was you was also helpful as someone who's not Muslim, is kind of understanding some of the different practices that you might not know. And especially for young readers, that'll be helpful as these different practices are in the news. And so understanding why things are happening.
Right. I mean, as an author, there's always this like a decision that you have to make. Am I there to teach my reader something? You know, um, I'm already teaching a little bit about partition, right? Do I also need to be clarifying about my faith, my religion? Because ultimately it's my faith, my religion. Maha and her family are kind of like the spokespeople in that sense. Um, but also there's so many Muslim kids who will pick up this book and feel seen.
Yeah.
There's so many Muslim kids who may not identify with the partition, but they would identify with this. There's a lot of the story takes part during the month of Ramadan. And so, because Dadi is here, Maha has decided to be fasting for the first time because her family is not really religious, but her Dadi is. And so she's kind of learning this part of her faith from her. And so she's not just learning about the partition, she's also learning about herself and her religion and her faith and things like that. And so, if you pick up a book and you have been going through this process of being in school when everyone's eating lunch and you're fasting, or people are asking questions, I just want, those kids to be seen as well. And if you learn something because you don't fast, that's awesome too. Like, yeah, you can't, like I said, please everybody or make a book that's perfect for everybody, but hopefully everybody can get something out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrea, did we have any questions? I saw a lot going on in the chat, so I just wanted to check in.
Yeah, there's been some kind of comments going back and forth, but one question I do want to highlight, this is from NM Siddiqui, and the question is, my father lived through partition, but I've only heard bits and pieces of my family's experience, such as fleeing to East Pakistan, returning to India, and then settling in Pakistan. So, what advice would you give for questions or how to ask him to share his story?
Hmm. You know, um, It depends. Everybody doesn't want to share. Like, I grew up with people who really wanted to talk about it. And for them, it was almost therapeutic to be like, talking about things in the past, like this, like Dadi in the book. But then I've also met people who don't want to at all talk about it just because they went through something that was traumatizing to them and they don't want to discuss it. It's in the past. It's kind of brings up bad memories. So I think just being respectful, if you do have an interest in learning more about your family's history in partition, ask, it was a father, yes, ask your father if he would be willing to share. And if he says no, then you should respect that. But I'm guessing that you probably have heard some bits and pieces. Also, there are always other relatives too. So if he's not that interested in sharing, you can ask others and kind of like bring it together in your mind. But just ask respectfully, would you like to sit and one day just spend some time with me, and talk about it? And I'm hoping that he would be happy to answer. And I would suggest that you either record it or write it down. A big part of why I wrote the story is because this generation is kind of like now really old. The people who went through this and were old enough, like if my dad was, I think, 1 year old. So, he did not have memories, but the people who were old enough to kind of actually remember a lot about the partition have either passed away or they're close to passing or they're pretty old. And so that's why these archives have kind of sprouted up in a lot of places in not just the US, but in other countries also, including India, including Pakistan, where they're recording the stories of these elder members of their family, so that we can kind of have this shared history after they pass away. So I would encourage that. Ask them, can I take some time? Can I take you out for tea? Can I sit with you one day when you're free and just tell me what happened? And either write it down or record it. But just make sure it's not traumatizing them, because everyone had a different experience. And yeah, yeah. That's all I can say. Just ask them questions. I feel like elders love it when we ask them questions. They feel like we don't care about them, but that shows that we do.
And I think, the archives that you talked about, they were started in 2010, by Gunita Singh Bhalla. And so she, at the time in 2022, that they had about 10,000 stories, and now they're up to over 12,000. So
Are you
people,
talking about the one in San Francisco?
yeah,
Or
yeah.
yes.
The
So
one,
yes, that is kind of the one that I framed mine of my fictional one with, but they're not the only ones. There are different universities that are doing this. There's like a lot of stuff happening also in India and Pakistan, but especially for people who have moved away, and yeah. So I think they're one of the more established ones.
yeah, I
But
think they're one of they're sort of the first one and sort of
yes,
built up. But I
yes.
think what's great about it is you could start with that, sort of sharing those stories with someone and asking for clarification if they're ready to talk about it. One of the things
Absolutely.
she that Bala talked about is that people didn't remember until they were asked. So someone had repressed that his parents were killed during the violence and what happened,
Wow.
and that, he finally came to the United States, but just making sure that, like you said, you're being sensitive to what people might not remember and what it might bring up. And did you do your own sort of the Dadi story was your Dadi story, correct?
No, my
Or was
Dadi
it a
story was
different
not my
story?
Dadi
Okay.
story. My Dadi went to East Pakistan, and they went a few years after. I don't think they went right during partition. They went a year, 2 years later. Um, what I did was that I listened to and watched videos of a lot of partition stories. So again, the thing was that, I wanted to make it, I wanted to, I wanted to share a lot of stories. This is one person, Dadi, but actually it's a lot of different stories. Just the fact that how did people move? Some people went on trains, some people went on foot, some people had these carts, some people had, I don't, there were no cars back then, but some people walked, some people had uh like these horse or oxen drawn carts, and then there were trains. So I didn't want to like just have one story, so I kind of like watched a lot of videos. If you go to YouTube and you just type out Partition of India stories, there are a lot of people who have asked their grandparents or their parents to sit on camera and just talk, and most of them are either in Urdu or in Punjabi, so you kind of have to know one of those languages. And then a lot of those are recorded like transcripts or written down. So I just read a lot of things, and I kind of decided what would be this narrative and try to make it, you know,
Mhm.
just include a lot of different voices, a lot of different people's experiences.
Did you see differences that appeared or sort of came up for you between those that went to East Pakistan versus West Pakistan, or even the stories of people that stayed in India versus people that had to leave, or even if they were in India, they had to move around. Did you see
No,
any?
I mean the details, obviously everybody's story is different, but the emotions were all the same. The emotions of, if you are, say, a young person, if you're a preteen and adolescent, the emotions of like fear and worry, but also watching adults fear and worry, that's a very different thing. And then all of those things, there's this one scene in the book where Dadi's telling the story, and she talks about when they're on the train, and she looks out and she sees like corpses on as she's passing by. And Maha's a journalist, so I think she just kind of listens. But Maha's friend is also there, and Maha's friend kind of is shocked, and she's like, "This is not appropriate. Why are you telling us this?" And her grandmother says, "Well, I went through it. I saw it with my own eyes. Nobody cares whether it was appropriate for me. So I'm just telling you what I saw. If I could go through it, you can listen to it." That's kind of like how being a witness to something awful works. And I just kind of like had that. I heard that over and over in a lot of the interviews that I researched and a lot of people I talked to, that just this fear and this dread and this all those emotions that come up when you're even today we see wars and genocide and being refugees and just, yeah, those emotions are the same. It just the details of how things happen may be different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a really good point in that you illustrated is that teachers are sort of censoring that and deciding what could be, and people are deciding for teachers what could be
Well,
included.
kids would definitely get scared. I mean, sure, I get that, but for example, this is a middle grade novel, and I've seen fourth graders pick it up. I've seen fifth graders pick it up, and so parents will ask or teachers will ask, what age is it okay for? So I do tell them there is there's some things in this book that you know best for your child, you know best for yourself or your students, whether they're able to read this. I don't want to have anybody have nightmares because of something I wrote. Um, so just proceed with caution. I mean, and then decide for yourself whether it's worth reading when you're 10 versus when you're older, or you're an adult.
Yeah. Well, and you also infused Sadat, who someone I didn't know, Sadat Hassan Manto, and
Saadat Hassan Manto, yes, he's awesome. He was awesome.
can you tell us about how you decided to integrate his stories into the story? So the story within the story?
So Saadat Hassan Manto was a writer, one of the really great you know, kind of like this fiction, short story. I don't know if he wrote poetry or not. I think mostly what I know him of is fiction and poetry. And he was originally from India. I believe he was born either in Ludhiana or near Ludhiana, but somewhere in India, and then he migrated to Pakistan at partition, and he wrote about the partition. So he has some really cool stories that have been translated into English as well. And I don't know why I think he's always been associated in my mind with the partition because, my people I heard about his stories as he has this very famous short story collection called Toba Tek Singh, which is again, I think it's translated in English because he was like very renowned. It is a short story collection of which is fiction, I guess, but not really because it's pretty horrific. It is about this like mental asylum and what happens to the people in it during partition. And it's just kind of like very caricature like. But anyway, that's just one of his stories. There's others that are there in the book. So he's not a big figure in the book. He's just, they're reading one of his books, The Model Dawn, which is also another one, which you can get off of, the internet anytime. But I heard about him growing up. We studied him in when I was in high school. So he's a very natural part of the literature surrounding the partition in Pakistan.
Yeah, and I think that was what was interesting is that he, like you said, he's part of your school. How is he presented? Is he sort of part of the, the canon in Pakistan, or
I
is
would think so. I would think so. I mean, again, it has been a very long time since I was there and since I was a child there, but definitely he is part of like considered one of the great writers of that time. And so, definitely if you want to read fiction set around the partition, he would be one of the ones that you read.
Yeah, and I did look up the movie on Netflix isn't available here, but did you watch it? Did you see?
No, I didn't. I did hear about it, but I didn't watch it. I was like, no. Is it good? Have you watched
No,
it?
I read from the book in the partition, and so I was trying to find it. Just
Yeah. A lot of things are not
yeah,
available here, but probably in India and Pakistan they are. So,
yeah, and just kind of getting a sense of again that I grew up with the Indian stories, of the partition, and that's where a lot of my research has been. But there's this whole other lens that we need,
yes.
and
Yes.
so getting that.
Somebody's asking what movie. Do you know the title of it?
It was called Monto, I think, and then it was about
It was
his
kind of
life.
like a
Yeah,
biographical, like about his life, I feel.
docudrama sort of thing. But it's not available here on Netflix, but I think in other countries it was. But Maha,
Probably on YouTube somewhere. Everything's on
yeah,
YouTube.
yeah, Maha
I
mentioned
watch a lot of
something.
like 1990 Bollywood movies on YouTube now. So you can
Yeah,
always
there's everything
get a
there.
hold of something.
And then, so how do you want you said that this is middle grades and that different people can interact with it. How would you like young learners to engage with this book? How do you see it?
Two things. First, a caveat, it is definitely a story about a seventh grader, so around 12 years old, but it is not only for children. All my middle grade novels that I write, I kind of am very conscious of the fact that a lot of adults read um, uh, my books, especially. So I would say probably about a quarter of my readers of this book in particular are not kids. So I don't write like that. So if you've not picked up this book and you're thinking, oh, it's a book for kids, it's really not. You won't read it thinking, I just read a children's book. I promise you that. There was this Indian book reviewer, and I saw her YouTube or somewhere online. She had posted a video, and she kept saying, "I can't believe this is a kid's book. Somebody told me it's a kid's book. It's not a kid's book. It's a book. It's a book about a child who learns about something." So I will tell you that it's not only for children. You can read it at any age and feel like you read a good novel, because that is one of my goals when I write these books, is to make sure that I'm catering to every age. And secondly, in answer to your question, how can we engage with it? How can we talk about it? Not just with kids, I would encourage, talking with your family as well. It's there's not only the partition isn't the only topic of history that's talked about in this book. This book is set in Texas, in Sugar Land, which is a very densely South Asian suburb of Houston. And Maha is in seventh grade, and in seventh grade in Texas, children study Texas history. So instead of US history, which is I think the year before in seventh grade, you study Texas history. And so there's a lot of Texas, not a lot, some Texas history, and she's trying to kind of compare and contrast in school, in social studies class,
Mhm.
Texas history, where Texas used to be first a part of Mexico and then its own country and then became a part of the US. And so a lot of the topics and themes are similar. You know, where do you belong? Are you now suddenly you were Mexican and now suddenly you're American? How does that work? A lot of those things about why history is important are in this book. There's an educator guide that's very comprehensive that's on my website. So if you are teaching this book or you are an educator, you can use that guide to kind of guide your discussions. But you know, even if you're not and you just want to talk about why history is important and why partition or your history, if you're from some other background, everyone has history, you know, and we kind of like I love history. I'm a history buff. And so all history, not just partition. Um, and I think that there's real value in talking about things that happened in the past because we can learn from them and we can kind of see parallels in the current times as well. So yeah, just you know, if you're an educator, you can use that guide or just talk about, hey, you know, ask your elders questions or talk about things you heard from your elders and tell your kids about that. Just a lot of different really good conversations can be had, I feel.
And I'm gonna share again and talk a little bit more about the educator guide and other ways to bring it in the classroom because we do have a lot of educators on the call. But Andrea, are there any questions as I move into the next part?
I don't have any additional questions right now, but this is a good reminder for folks to continue dropping those questions and comments in the chat as you keep talking. And Ritu, we did have somebody share that they did find the Manto on Netflix. So,
Was it linkable? Because I found it on Netflix, but it wouldn't let me play it. So it's there, but it told me that it wasn't available in this country, which, you know,
Um,
this is all
yeah,
kind of so.
Ritu, I did just have another question pop up. So, this is very curious about your upcoming Ms. Marvel Remnants of the Past book. Is partition a focus of or explored in this book as well? They go on to say, I appreciate the way that the Ms. Marvel series on Disney Plus helped to connect students to this important part of the past and present.
yeah, I think we've kind of gone. I have so for those of you who don't know, I wrote a YA novel, my first YA novel about Miss Marvel, or it's like Miss Marvel novel, which is so exciting. And I was very honored to be asked by Marvel to write this book. We will show us a picture. Can we do that right now? Sorry. Can you
Yeah, we can definitely do that
just
right now.
since we're talking about it, I was okay. So there it is. It's a beautiful cover. It is a YA novel, but again, anyone can read it at any age. That's my second book this year that's coming out. Some of Us Are Brave, which is middle grade, like the Partition Project. So, in answer to your question, this story does not have partition as the context. No, I think we're kind of all used to it. If you've seen the Disney Plus series, partition plays a big role in that story. And I think that if I had also written another Miss Marvel with the same background, people would have been like, you know, what are you doing? So a totally different story. It is very cool. It is kind of a related topic. It is about colonialism and repatriation of colonial artifacts, colonial artifacts that were taken away because of colonial theft. Sorry about that. So Miss Marvel, there's like an exhibit of South Asian artifacts in display in the U.S. and somebody steals them, and she finds out that they are taking them back to India and Pakistan because they actually belong to the Mughal and the British took them. Like we have so much of our all of our museums in the Western world are filled with artifacts that have been stolen during colonial times. And who does that belong to? Who does that art, who does that treasure belong to? if the colonial power took it. So that's kind of like similar in a little way, but not really partition. No. But I'm proud of the story. It's going to come out in January. Please pre-order it now. Pre-orders really help authors. It gives the publisher a signal that the book is wanted and they print more copies. And, I think you will like it. I had so much fun writing it. Yeah, I had a lot of fun writing it.
Do we have more questions about that, Andrea, or either of the books? Do you want to tell us about Some of Us Are Brave?
Some of Us Are Brave is middle grade, so it is kind of like my next one after the Partition Project. And no, actually, I have another one after that. So the next one after The Strongest Heart. It is about it's set in 2017, around Hurricane Harvey, which was a very destructive hurricane slash flooding situation that took place in the Houston area in Southeast Texas in 2017, and it's three characters who don't kind of a little bit know each other, but not really, don't like each other at all. Two boys and a girl who kind of like stuck together when the storm hits with no adults. There's also a couple of animals and a younger sibling. And it's kind of a survival story, but it's also talking about bravery and they're all scared of something. And then they come together to around this very scary event of flooding. And getting over your fears, even if you are scared, just kind of surviving. And it has flood myths from around the world. So, we have, of course, if you are from the Judeo Christian background, or actually Islamic Judeo Christian background, we all know the story of Noah and the flood, but actually almost all cultures have a flood myth or a creation myth that's connected to flooding. So I was just so fascinated with that. So there's a lot of those. They're actually art inside the book. They're pictures of the different cultural stories around floods. So you can also pre-order that one.
Um,
All right, you can go back now. Sorry, I kind of
Oh,
skipped ahead,
no,
and
no, no,
I know
that's
we don't have a lot of
what's
time,
supposed
so
to
let's
happen.
go
But
over.
this is more of instructional resources, so I'm happy to send this out. Andrea, I'll send it to Andrea and she can send it out. But I did want to, Sadia talked a little bit about the educator's guide. There is a link there. I did want to play this because Meta's reading my emails. This came across my Instagram, and I just thought that it was just really well.
I'm so excited to share with you an enlightening and informative, historically inspired book. This book is called The Partition Project, and it is by Saadia Faruqi. Imagine being so tormented and threatened in your own home that you have no other choice but to leave. Well, unfortunately, there are so many cases in history and even now that are similar to situations like this. And this is a story that our main character, Maha, hears about. When Maha is presented with this project and the challenge to create a documentary on something she's passionate about, she really struggles to find a topic. But that's when her grandma starts talking about her childhood growing up in North India, and also her experience during the partition between India and Pakistan. My own grandparents had very difficult childhoods, and I often ask them about their upbringing. Very similar to Maha, I was very intrigued and interested in my grandpa's stories growing up because it's so different from mine. It makes me also very fortunate and grateful for what I have. This book gave me not just a sense of the partition in general, how huge and big the whole entire situation was and how many lives it affected, but it also gave me a sense of someone's individual life growing up in the partition.
So I just
Oh,
thought that was just great
I
because
love that. And I
one of
love that she was able to connect it to her own story. I think I know Val, she's actually she tagged me when she did this review a long time ago, and then she's also reviewed a few. She's great. She's been reviewing books since she was a little girl. So if you go back to her Instagram and you watch her videos when she was much younger, and so it's nice to see how grown up she's looking in that. Um but that's important, right? To be able to, even if you're from a different culture, a different background, you should be able to. That's why we read fiction. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, why do we need to read fiction? That's such a big reason why. It helps us become more empathetic, and it helps us like kind of like make those connections. This happened to you, but also in my background or in my life a similar thing is happening or has happened. And that's that's the power of storytelling.
Yeah, and so and just thought that it was a nice way to see how it can be effective in the classroom and ways that you can, it doesn't have to be in the classroom, but if we're going to use it in the classroom, elevate their connections. And there have been more that are popping up. There's the Partition Museum in Amritsar and Delhi, but then there are art pieces. So this is the Anti-Memorial Project from Pritika Chowdhury. And it's this anti-colonialism sort of really thoughtful feminist art. Again, maybe not for middle grades, but maybe you could have a budding feminist, but getting them engaged in what they're thinking about. And then the Heritage Lab has
Absolutely.
visual history of the partition. And really what it does is look at both Pakistani and Indian art. And so the difference of how it's represented. So I don't know if you like saw any of that. I know you listened to a lot of stories, but I don't know if you looked at some of the artist renderings at all as you were talking.
I did a little bit. It wasn't the focus of the book, and so I kind of like I did that more for my own kind of like understanding. But and I remember when I was growing up in Pakistan, there used to be art exhibits sometimes about, you know, artists who, and I think that was my introduction to like the, I still remember as a child, some artists have done like really like gory almost paintings depicting the partition. And to me, that was like a very sobering moment. I must have been, you know, in middle school myself, and thinking, oh, you know, it's like you're taught a very sanitized version, obviously. You know, you're like, okay, 1 million people died, but what does that mean? There were trains full of dead bodies. Like you would have a full train, and when it would reach the station, everybody would be dead. And like to think of it in that terms, it's so horrific. You know, people would walk for like so long that only young, healthy people survived that walk, and they did not know what to do with the body, so they would just dig holes while they were walking and bury the people who passed away, the elders, the babies. So, I mean, should we be talking about that? I think so. I think that that kind of that helps us understand the impact of something that happens. So, and art is a good way to do that. You know, I may not want to talk to you, but I can look at a painting and share that and kind of get the message across.
Yeah, and get that aesthetic meaning making so that you can have a different understanding that might not be,
Absolutely.
yeah, what you see in the classroom. Because Maha talked so much about uh, the journalism in the newspaper, I thought it's also a good way for teachers to think about critical media literacy and ways to look at different texts and who they are. So I did make a connection here for people. Like I said, you can look at ways to use this in the classroom and ways to really think about the sources and where they're coming from. And the fact, Dadi's story is very authentic and it's her story. But like you said, there are very similar stories and different details that pop up. And so what can we get from that? How can we do that? How can we help young learners think about Dadi's story and what else we might have? And I don't know if that's how your daughter's thinking about it when she's thinking about journalism, but I think it's just looking at the different sources is really important this day and age because there's a
Yes,
lot.
especially these days, we really have to learn, even as adults, you know, to be able to gauge whether something is factual and it's correct and it's backed by evidence and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing this. This is
Yeah,
great.
yeah, no. And for those of you thinking about using oral histories, Facing History does a lot and also connecting the past to the present. So I thought about ways that you can use this in the classroom in bridging the histories. So with civil rights and protest movements, looking at colonialism and imperialism, immigration, and then World War II and looking at that after. I also, what I think when I talked to Sharon last year, the moon from Dehradun, there were fewer books, and now that there are more, and it's just really exciting. So I really like to update people about what's happening and the different books that you can use as part of a text set or just to complement what's happening. And can you tell us a little bit about Zarina Divided? I'm hoping that we'll get it as part of Saba. It just came out in 2025. So do you know any more about it? It is available, so you can.
That is not a book I have written. I know a lot of people think the last name is the same. Reem is a good friend of mine, but it's a verse novel and it just came out and I think it's really good. All of these books are really good. In fact, the year that the Partition Project came out, there were three middle grade novels about the partition at the same time. And because we were all kind of like writing about the same thing, we did a few events together. So Amila and the After by Veera Hiranandani, which is like a sequel almost or a companion book to the Night Diary, and then my book, and then Lion of the Sky by Ritu Hemnani. These three literally came out like one after the other. And it's nice. It's nice to see, that this topic is being talked about more, or there's more awareness in the US, which, people did not know about it. And honestly, like Miss Marvel's, the Disney show did its part as well, because a lot of people were like, oh, this is the first time we've heard of the partition. What is this? So I thought that was cool.
Yeah. And so I think that there are different lenses in each of these novels and different ways to bring in the stories. And I think that's the important thing. I want to stop sharing because I think there might be a few other questions and just give you a chance to answer them or close us out.
Yeah, there's one last question that we haven't answered yet, and this is kind of more of like a nuts and bolts author question. And Ferris is, Saadia, you're a very prolific writer. What is your writing process, and when do you write, and how long does it take you to finish a book?
Oh my God, thank you so much, Farah. I was counting the other day. I'm at 61 books so far published. So I'm kind of like I don't know. I had to do the math a few times to make sure is that really correct. It is, and I have to say by caveat, they're not all like 400 plus page books like this one. I write a lot of books for little kids, like picture books and early readers, so that kind of helps me keep up my numbers. Um, I just write a lot. I write a lot. I read a lot. I'm not writing all the time because I do a lot of like what I'm doing now, school visits, virtual visits, in person. I travel a lot throughout the country all year round, talking to kids about writing, about my books. So I am not writing all the time, but if I do have a book coming out that I need, like, I have a deadline that I have to turn in a manuscript to my editor by this date, then probably a month, 2 months, 3 months before that, that is all I'm doing. So in those days, my family knows there will be no laundry, there will be no dinner, there everyone fends for themselves. And that's a interesting thing. I'm glad you didn't ask me how do you manage that with your kids, because if one more person asks me that, I will kind of erupt. We never ask male writers how they manage their writing careers if they have kids. So I'm like, thank you for not asking that. My kids are now teenagers. My son is actually in college, does not even live with me anymore. So that helps a lot where I'm not doing the day-to-day care of them. As long as they can do a lot of things themselves. But um it helps that I love it. I love writing. It's never a chore. I always have great ideas in my mind. So um I don't know. If you want to be a writer, there's no shortcut to it. You just have to sit down and just to write a lot of stuff. And I wrote a lot of things that never got published. It didn't This was not like, I just started writing and it was good. There were many, many, many years of very unsuccessful writing before I got to this point. And now I kind of feel like I've got it under control a little bit.
And now you are a repeat Saba winner. So
Oh my God, yes, thank you. Well, I feel like this is cool because you guys really, I feel like Thank you so much again for this honor. I think it was a thousand questions the
Hmm.
last time,
Yep.
which won an honor. So I feel like I'm kind
Hmm.
of improving.
Yep.
I'm
Yeah.
improving. But it means a lot because, you're dedicated to this history and culture of South Asia, and I do not live in South Asia anymore. So for me, it's always a struggle to make sure that I represent my birthplace very well and authentically, even though it has been 27 years now since I've lived there. So it's always a challenge. It's always something that I want to make sure that I'm doing well in a way that if somebody from Pakistan picked up this book, they would not be, oh, and yet another American writer writing nonsense. I want to make sure that I'm representing them well too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. Andrea, do
Mhm.
you want to finish this?
Yeah, I'm just echoing Ritu to say thank you, Saadia, so much for sharing the Partition Project with all of us. We are so grateful that you continue to write, and I hope you write 60 more, just as wonderful as the first 60. And we look forward to, everything that comes from your wonderful creative mind and from the amazing continuing growing body of authors that you inspire, because I know so many of the authors that we come into contact with through Saba also point to your books and say,
Oh my
do you
gosh.
know this book? We love this book. Do you love this book too? And so I just thank you for everything that you've put out into the world, as well. So thank you very much for all of that.
You just made my day. Thank you. I don't know. I did not expect that. I mean, part of being a writer is encouraging other people to write, and especially South Asians, a lot of times don't really go into fields like literature and art. So I'm always encouraging people, hey, I'm just the person who kind of opened the door in a lot of ways just because there was nothing before, and now we have so much more. And
Mhm.
just I want to encourage all of you, if you're interested in writing your story, any story, doesn't have to be, you know uh, like historical. um yeah, and I'm always available. You can reach out to me through my website, and I'm happy to answer questions anytime about writing or anything.
And I'm happy to talk about the book and plan about the book. So for my educators, I would love to talk about it. Please don't hesitate to reach out. So,
Thank you.
Fantastic. And Sadia will be in touch soon. I'm waiting for your physical award to arrive in my office. So as soon as I
Oh,
get that, I will turn around and ship it right off to you. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Our recording from tonight's webinar will not only be posted on our South Asia Book Award YouTube channel, but in the announcement blurb and the description of the Partition Project, we'll have the recording linked up and Ritu's slides as well, but also a link to the resources that are on Sadia's website. So all of that will be in one place for you, and we'll be emailing that out next week as well. So if you have time Monday afternoon on December the 8th at 4 o'clock Central Time, we hope you will join us for our next installment of the Meet the Author webinar series, where we'll meet Mira Sriram and her book, The Spice Box, which was the winner in our early readers or our picture book category. So we hope to see you Monday afternoon. Thank you again very much for joining us this evening. I hope you have a great rest of your night. Thank you, everyone.